I grew up with my dad riding motorcycles, and my grandfather rode motorcycles. And so my dad, we used to go for long rides. My grandparents moved out to Arizona when I was young, and so my dad and I would ride from California to Arizona. So that I have a lot of memories of that. And then when I was about 16, my dad said, you got to learn how to ride a motorcycle. So he threw me on. And I remember dropping his motorcycle many times in a parking lot trying to do slow moving turns and that sort of thing. And then when I spoke to Jeff for the first time, then I just immediately just doubled down and started riding all the time.
Way back in 2003, I walked into my brother's apartment in Memphis and I saw this book sitting on the floor. It had a bright red stripe on the bottom with white lettering, simple, that said the Bikeriders. The photograph on top was a black and white photograph of about 4 motorcycle riders cresting a rise in a rural interstate. I immediately was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen, just the look and the feel of it. Then you start opening it up and there are these incredible photographs, black and white photographs. But in that edition, which was a reissue of Danny Lyon's original book, there were color photographs. And for me, the color photographs just jumped out. I think one of the things that took me the longest was trying to figure out, how to turn a book of photographs into a narrative film. Obviously, there is a lot of text in the book in terms of interviews, but none of that's a story. They're anecdotes. And kind of like training wheels, I actually started with a big section of Kathy's interview where she talks about meeting Benny for the first time.
When she meets them for the first time, she's disgusted by them. She's terrified of them, She's speaking about them having their belly buttons out and it's a very kind of foreign environment for her. But then there's also the kind of excitement and the thrill of the unknown. And then over time, it's that novelty and that thing that initially became much more dangerous and kind of damaging. And I think she really desires a life with Benny, and he has an inability to give her that. And it's interesting because I think, Kathy and Johnny are both really seeking something out in Benny that he's unable to give them.
The Bikeriders follows the development of a Midwest motorcycle club from the late 50s, where it was a regional club just made up of friends, through the course of the 60s into the early 70s, where it grows into a proper biker gang. Ending up kind of destroying the original intention for a lot of the members. And the whole thing is viewed through the eyes of Kathy, who's married to one of the Bikeriders. And really, the central conflict for the characters in the Bikeriders is a love triangle between Kathy, her young husband Benny, and Johnny, the leader of the club. Both Kathy and Johnny are fighting over Benny. Johnny wants Benny to run the club. Kathy wants Benny to stay alive and possibly be out of it.
There's many mysteries around Benny, and there's many things that I've sort of filled in for myself, but essentially Benny's a sort of lone wolf. But yet there's this part of humanity that craves togetherness, And so within that lone wolf attitude, he ended up finding the Vandals and sort of father figure or a big brother figure with Johnny. He meets Kathy, who Jodie plays, and they fall in love and get married very quickly. But he's always got one foot out of the covers. He kind of has this way of being able to compartmentalize, and he can leave at any moment. So that's Benny, and he ends up being pulled between Kathy and Johnny, where Kathy wants Benny to stop riding and get out, and Johnny wants Benny to take over.
The photos are their own thing, and then the transcriptions are their own thing as well, because the transcriptions are they're dark stories, a lot of them are, And then these photos, though, are very romantic in terms of the images that he has of these people, which also, I think, tracks with what we were kind of saying. I think, for Danny, it's he can't help but fall in love with his subjects, if you will.
I mean, if you look into Danny Lyon, at the age of 19, he became the staff photographer of SNCC, the Southern Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So at the age of 19 in Atlanta, he was roommates with John Lewis and took some of the most iconic civil rights photographs you've ever seen before he even did the Bikeriders. That's when he went to Chicago, and then he started riding with this club and photographing them, not to mention all the work he's done since. The guy's prolific, and the guy is a serious legend for American photography. And so for me to show up and say, hey, I really love your book, I want to do something with it, he was very gracious to me, and he's been gracious to me through the entire process.
The photos are so beautiful. You know, you can't help but when you read that book, like, want to be a part of it. And I think what's so incredible about Danny is, you know, the kind of environments in which he's captured these people in. Like, with Kathy, I only had like three or two photographs of her, but there was so much that I could draw from those pictures, and how, you know, you can see he's been observant, and they're not aware that he's taken the pictures. And, you know, as an actor, an actress, when you're coming to do this and you're kind of trying to find every kind of little piece of information, there was actually so much that you were able to draw from the photographs.
You never know when you meet your heroes if you're gonna get along or how they're gonna treat you or anything. And Tom makes me laugh harder than almost anyone in this world. My stomach hurts when I'm around him. And he's really kind and fun to be around. And then on top of that, he's been really generous with his sort of showing of his toolkit, where we'll talk about acting and he'll kind of go, you know, this is something that I do. And he'll kind of show me, it's like a magician sharing their tricks with you. And that's, I'm endlessly grateful for that. So he feels like a brother now to me.
It's like he vibrates a millimeter underneath his skin. There's something going on with Tom Hardy. And when you put the camera on him, it's all happening at once. He can just be sitting there smoking a cigarette, and there's so much going on there. You know, there are movie stars for a reason, and Tom Hardy is a movie star.
I remember my first day. I had no dialogue, and we were all kind of sat around a campfire, and it was a night shoot, and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and, you know, everyone was freezing cold, and Michael Shannon had like 2 pages of dialogue, and I remember like watching him for the first time, and then just kind of looking around, and all of us were just like, well, like, we can all just go home. Like, it was incredible. It was like a masterclass, you know? And I was sat next to Austin, and I was like, you know, we were kind of saying, you know, from now on, I'm just going to think, what would Michael Shannon do? Whenever I come to a scene, like, just think, what would Michael Shannon do?
Michael Shannon is, we were doing this scene the other night where he's talking about how he wanted to be in the military, and we're sitting around the campfire, and it was some of the greatest acting I've ever seen. And to get to watch that over and over and see how he changes things every time, he's newly alive every take, he's improvising little things, he is so incredibly present. He did a take, and I walked up afterward and walked over to Tom, and Tom looked at me and says, doesn't get any better than that. And then he kept doing takes, and he kept finding new things, and it was so inspiring. And Mike as well, he's just an incredibly focused actor, which is also really inspiring, because he'll finish a take and then he walks off by himself and he just smokes a cigarette and just stands by himself. And then he comes back and he hits it again, and it's just, I could watch him all day long. You know, I relish every time that he's on set.
I think when you use slow motion and which to my film school professors, the technical term is overcranking. When you use freeze frames, when you use anything like this, I mean, it's a big stylistic choice. And from the very beginning of my career, I always kind of eschewed style. It was like, nope, story first. Story, story, story. I don't want to get in the way as a director. I don't want to show my fingerprints. I really want the story to come through first. However, there are certain times where if you can use it and it doesn't stick out, then you've really achieved something. There are, off the top of my head, 3 slow motion shots in the film. The push in on Benny at the pool table is overcranked, and the shot of Kathy on the back of that motorcycle where she takes that breath is overcranked.
Jeff is a very, very special and incredible director. And one of his strengths is that he knows the script inside and out. For one, he wrote it, but 2, he wrote it with such care and has thought about every angle, so that by the time that we get to set, he has the blueprint. And that's something he told me early on is, I've already seen the film in my mind, so we have that to fall back on. If you want to try things out there and experiment with things, just know we can always go back to the film that I have in my head. And that's such a comforting support system, you know, as an actor, because then you can make mistakes, you can try things, but you always know that he's got you.
And there is a moment that I knew was very important to the film when Kathy is on the back of Benny's motorcycle for the first time, and they're crossing this bridge, and this whole horde of motorcycles comes up around them, and the sounds and the vibrations. It's actually not about Kathy falling in love with Benny. It's about Kathy falling in love with motorcycles and motorcycle culture. Yes, we have the benefit of her voiceover, but it's something you gotta feel. It's something that you have to experience. And so it was a really important piece of the film, because without it, all of her actions following don't really make sense. You have to watch her fall in love with motorcycles. And there is this shot that's in profile, it's handheld, and it's overcranked. It's slow motion of her basically closing her eyes and lowering her head, and it almost looks like she's breathing in the back of Austin's jacket, but she's certainly breathing in the moment. As soon as we got that shot, I was like, okay, good. Success for today. I'm very proud of that scene. And then when you score it to the Shangri-Las, it's the best I could possibly imagine. The motorcycles are the least precise instruments on the planet. These motorcycles, some of which are 60 years old, you know, like we had bikes from the 40s, so that'd be 80 years old almost. I mean, these things, they didn't like it when it was cold, they didn't like it when it was hot, they didn't like it when it was dry, and they didn't like it when it was wet. So out of all of the prima donnas I've ever worked with, these motorcycles were the most